Hello everyone, and welcome back to MUP Lore Warpath Edition. My name is Wiki Dave, and with me, as my co-host, as always, I've got Claudio. How are you doing, Claudio?
Hi, Dave. I'm really looking forward to today, so I'm doing really fine.
Yes, and there's a very special reason why he's looking forward to today, because we have two special guests, one from the MUP Epic team. We've got Matthias.
Yeah, great to be here.
And also, we've actually got the writer of a re-release of a book that's coming out, Chris Verspeak. How are you doing, Chris?
I'm good. Yeah, I'm good.
Good. So, yes, the book, First Strike Alpha Edition, is a re-release of First Strike that came out.
Alpha Strike Edition.
Alpha Strike Edition. When did First Strike come out again for the first time? That was so I got mixed messages. Some people said it was with the Kickstarter, because this is well before my time. Was it with the original Kickstarter Warpath, or did it come out shortly after?
Yeah, the original. It was originally written to go out with the Kickstarter, the Warpath Kickstarter package.
Ah, okay. But if you are listening to this on the day it was released, you can actually buy the new edition, the Alpha Edition, from Adepticon, which is out, today should be the first day of Adepticon. So you can actually get the physical copy there, but you can also pre-order an edition on the Winged Hussar publishing website as well. And all the links will be down in the description below. So with that kind of housekeeping out of the way, we're going to dive into Chris. So Chris, we'll start with you. I guess, how does it feel to have a book that you wrote years ago to actually be re-released? Did you ever kind of expect that to kind of
happen? No, not really. It's been a long road getting here. We did the first book, so the novel was written for the Kickstarter when Warpath was first launched as a huge scale game, and it was written. I had to write it quite quickly. It was quite a lot of work in quite a short amount of time, because there's all the other stuff that had to be written for Warpath as well. And if I'd have known that I'd still be writing it nearly 10 years later, I probably wouldn't have put myself under so much pressure the first time around. The original, it actually was this was all supposed to happen 4 or 5 years ago. It was actually announced at one of the Mantic Open days that we were going to be re-releasing the book and putting out a sequel as well. And then certain world events got in the way and kind of destroyed everybody's schedule and threw everything up in the air.
The plague.
And we can't. Yeah.
We do have to be specific about the plague, because that's COVID, because there's so many world events that are happening right now that we do have to be specific. So yes, it was.
Yeah. Well, I just didn't want to say that in case it's quite triggering for some people. How many times have you heard that thing being mentioned? But yeah, COVID happened, and it kind of ruined everybody's schedule, obviously, as well as other things. And so yeah, and obviously still a problem. So we sort of came back to it. We circled back around to it last year as a way and because of the Epic release, because of Epic Warpath being released, it seemed like this was the time to have another crack at it. So yeah, it's a tremendous opportunity. I'm really lucky to have the opportunity to go over the book again. Have you guys had the advanced copy?
Yes, we received the advanced copy.
Yes, very great.
And I've also read the old one when it came out. So
right. Well, I mean, I say in the foreword to the Alpha Strike edition that I'm very proud of the book. There's a lot about it that's really good. It is a good book. It's a good story, but it could have been better. And so, having Winged Hussar being willing to, give it another go, is a real blessing. It's been fully edited, so I've had an editor go through it all again and pull it apart, and then put it all back together again. And yeah, so hopefully, even if you've read the original, you will enjoy the new edition even more.
I would say just to add on that, if I'm going to make you become a bit of a salesman here, what would you say?
Go ahead.
How much of a difference is this edition compared to the original? How much you could say added content, or basically sell this? I'm not putting. putting you on the spot a little bit, but just to kind of reinforce how much that this isn't just a re-release. This is actually more of an addition.
No, I think of it. It's like the 4K scan of the original. So if you've seen a Blu-ray, the Blu-ray looks fine, but when you get the 4K scan, it brings out all that extra detail, all that extra grain. So it's the same story. So the first strike part of the book is the same story, but it's at a higher resolution, if you like. So we're able to pick out bits that perhaps weren't written as smoothly as I would like them to have been, and just clear up some bits and just make some things clearer. So the story just reads more smoothly than the original version did. And then it's called the Alpha Strike Edition. It's not just First Strike. I've also written a whole new. I thought of it as a short story. I started writing it as a short story, and it basically grew into a bit of a monster. It adds. It's nearly half as long as First Strike. So the short story I wrote is nearly half as long as the original novel. And that's a story called Crash Protocol. And it's sort of a prequel to First Strike. It features, how can I say, at least one of the characters in First Strike, and shows a little bit about how they came to be who they are in First Strike, as well as expanding the Warpath universe a little bit. And I know a lot of people want to hear this. All I can say really is, if you like the Rebs, you're going to want to read Crash Protocol.
And we doesn't like the Rebs.
Yeah,
I mean, we all know you were on that's on the podcast already. So woo, go Rebs! But I for myself have to say, from the first minute I saw the Dead Zone first edition Kickstarter, I was in love with the Rebs, and I'm still am.
Right.
And I'm so looking forward to this, because I think through the lens of the Rebs, this universe is quite interesting, because you have so many possibilities where to go. So really interested. Yeah.
I've been talking to one of the guys on the rules committee earlier this week about the future of the Rebs. There's options on the table is what I can say, really.
All right. Well, before we dive into some questions that are written down, I guess I'll just kind of cover one final base. What's your current involvement with the Mantic law, or Warpath law of writing? Because as you just said, you just spoke to someone from the rules committee. I'm assuming you're looking into tying some of those changes in with future law that is possibly written. So I guess, outside of just this book, what's your involvement with writing the law currently?
Gosh, that's a difficult question to answer.
Oh, sorry. So I guess with the books that you got coming, so you got that short story. When does a short story stop being a short story? I guess that's my question as well. Like as a writer, when do you start saying this is actually a novel rather than a short story?
Yeah, I don't really know. I originally said that it was a very long short story, and then Winged Hussar put it up on their website as being a novella. I thought, okay, fine. The publishers say it's a novella, so that's good enough for me.
Oh, fair enough.
It was originally just written as a short story. I just sort of had an idea of a scene and just started writing the scene, and then I thought, okay, that's who that character is, and then of course, then you think, okay, so what happens next, and then what happens next, and then what happens next, and then it turns into this slightly epic short story. I've written so that's First Strike, Alpha Strike edition. I've written for the epic Warpath book, which is also due to come out this year, which expands the Warpath universe again. And then I don't know what's next. I don't know what else is on the horizon. We'll have to wait and see.
Okay, I'm excited because I'm excited for that epic compilation.
We as a lore podcast are really looking forward to everything that's coming, because we think that the universe is really, really interesting. I think we will deep dive into that a bit later too. So, and ever evolving, which is a really, really good selling point for me at least. So I can't wait for what's to come.
Yeah, I think it's fresh enough that there's so much more you can do with it, but also established enough to to have some rules set with it. So it's in this nice little sweet spot of that. There's so much that potentially hasn't been told yet or can be told in the universe that I think we can't wait for more eyes to get on it, because obviously if you get more eyes on the universe and more people interested in the lore, you're going to have more of a budget to actually add more things to the lore and expand there. Instead of it just being a game with toy soldiers on the table, people can invest more money into it. And that's what we really want, is to encourage people to read up on this lore, speak up about the lore, and get more invested in it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. And I think First Strike, as the first novel in the Warpath universe and still the only novel in the Warpath universe that is on the wargaming side, so on the more conflict and fighty, that thing that we do when we are playing our tabletop war games, has a special place. And I'm really hoping, because I still remember that there were the rumors for like 2-3 books, and I really hope that this will be a stepping stone to get more of that, because I love every lore bit that we can find here and there, but a real novel where you have the time and space to deep dive into characters, how they behave, how they live in this livable world is a big plus.
Yeah, because culture you can't really show on the table, right? I mean, there's only so many times how much a rule book can actually show you about a sci-fi culture or a universe, and there's not stuff you can explore that way. And so the novels are really the only way you can see that. You can see, the class warfare that we do know does exist. You've got the first, second, and third spheres, and compared to the fourth and fifth spheres, there is definitely a class system at play. But you don't really see that much on the table. You do get little hints at it here and there, but you don't really get to see the boots on the ground, citizen kind of perspective on it. And that's what these novels are really, really, primed to actually show. So that's what's exciting about it.
That's a good segue to my first real question. Because Enforcers are somewhat the poster boys in and out of the universe. Because we know them, they are the head, they are the logo. People in the universe know them, we know them. So one of the main characters, one could argue maybe the main character, is an Enforcer, Lieutenant Commander Roker, who is also on the tabletop. And I think for me as a reader, it was really insightful to see how they operate. So how an Enforcer thinks, acts, also acts in unison with the GCPS troops, because they aren't on the same side. They have their own agendas. And how hard, or what were the challenges maybe, and what were like the exciting possibilities you had when writing an Enforcer into this story?
Yeah, the Enforcers are they're kind of complicated, because they are like a very good poster child. They're great. They're really nicely designed. I really like their armor, and I love that logo. I mean, this is why the cover of the Alpha Strike edition is basically the Enforcer logo, that kind of glow in the dark eyes outline shape. I really love that shape. Enforcers are essentially selective psychopaths, in that they are the will of the council, in the flesh. And sometimes the will of the council is pretty horrific, but they're all human beings to begin with, right? But sometimes the things they have to do are pretty inhuman. If you get told you got to go and exterminate this group of rebels, this maybe there's a mining colony that's not paying its taxes or won't move on or whatever, and the Enforcers aren't there just to gently suggest people move along. They're there to kill everything, and that's that's
their job.
That is their job. But at the same time, they've got personalities. They've got to be human beings. I remember having that conversation with Stuart Gibbs back in the day, talking to him about what war Enforcers like, do you think, amongst themselves? and I think he said something like that. Well, they've not had a personality transplant. They're still people with character. So I write them as being selectively psychopathic. So when they need to do something that's absolutely horrendous, the program kicks in and it removes whatever obstacles there are in their mind, whatever moral obstacles, whatever objections they might have, and it just enables them to do horrific things, so they can, have great fights. But then out of combat, they can be normal people. They're just normal human beings with personalities and, feelings and desires. I think that there's that balance. The trick is hitting that balancing line between those two things, their absolute loyalty to the council while also being human beings. Mm-hmm. And the trick is not making them robots, but also not making them cowboys, if you see what I mean. They're not. Yeah. They can't be like, action heroes. They can't be like Sylvester Stallone in Dredd, Judge Dredd, just wisecracking as they blow people apart. That's not the enforcers. They're cold and clinical when it comes to fighting and blowing people up. But then they've got to have personalities, otherwise you wouldn't want to read about them when they're not doing those things.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point. Yeah, because we want them to be humans too, because we don't want them to be, as you said, robots. We want that little spark of humanity still in there, because that's makes it interesting. Because then again, there's that clinical, methodical, and ruthless procedure when they are sent somewhere makes it much more interesting and daunting, maybe even to I don't want to face an enforcer.
They can be anything you want, really. If you're out there, trying to write enforcers, enforcers can be really mean, because sometimes people are really mean. We've not really talked a lot about the recruitment process for enforcers, but I think I've written in a couple of places. They can come from many different places. Sometimes they're recruited from professional militaries. Sometimes they're taken out of prisons. Anywhere where the recruiters can find men and women capable of doing horrendous things, they can be recruited. So, you can write enforcers who are naturally just unpleasant. Just the same as you can write enforcers that would be, seem like the kind of people you'd like to hang out with. The thing they all have in common, though, is when it comes to doing the mission, they're all absolutely cold.
That makes complete sense to me. And I think we have already a few examples, like an older character from the first Dead Zone Kickstarter, Sergeant Howlett, was the one with the face claws. We don't have much background to him, but we know that he's a psychopath. Like, we had stories where he allegedly shot his own people if they were retreating and so on. So he surely is a leader from the front, which can be something good, but he might have more of a psychopath background than, for example, Roka, who's a more analytic and strategist.
Yeah. I just think for some people the program has to do more work than others. Some people take to it more easily, to the work they're given. Some enforcers find it a lot more easy than others, and others need a little bit more, whatever it is the program does to them to get them through whatever it is they've got to do. But maybe this is probably why I like writing Pathfinders and even Rocker, because they've been given the leash isn't as tight on those guys. They have to be able to think much more independently because of the job they do. So they're not being sent in, they're not just being dropped into a combat zone and told to kill everything that moves. The Pathfinders and the Forward Observers are going out there and looking at what is happening. And so they have to be able to think and strategize and decide what needs to be done, as opposed to just being told, go and blow this thing up.
Yeah, so one follow-up question on this one is, because Roka being the main lead and an enforcer, how do you avoid the plot armor for the poster boys? Like putting him in a situation where he should be dead but still alive, and those kind of things, because he's in the center of the action.
Yeah, plot armor. How do I avoid plot armor? I don't know about that.
I guess how do you resist not making him like a Mary Sue or like a alter? Make him too OP in a world that hasn't really been established, like how powerful these characters actually are in terms of their abilities. I mean, do you have a guide from Mantic to say, enforcers aren't Supermen, but maybe they're kind of like Spartans from Halo? Are they a little bit super strong? So how do you kind of figure out? Was it clear where the balance was when it comes to enforcers on their power level, or was it more of a case of like you kind of just did whatever and just went with what felt right?
Yeah, I'd have to say I kind of feel like I've made it up as we've gone along. Really, they're not. I think they're not. I've envisaged them as being mortal. They can definitely die. A lot of the strength of the enforcers, don't forget, is their armor. There's a reason, their armor is made by Forge Fathers, because it's the best armor you can possibly get. And that armor makes them capable of doing an awful lot. But inside, they're human beings. Now, they've been enhanced, surgically. And I think in the source book, it talks about them having various nanites running through them. The thing about harm as well is to remember that harm isn't necessarily just physical harm. So, for Rocker, there's not a lot in the galaxy that one-on-one Rocker would really, really struggle with, right? Like he's not going to have any trouble fighting, a Veer-myn, a Veer-myn warrior, or even, certain forms of plague monster. That's why he's at the top of the game, because he's elite. Which isn't to say he's indestructible. I'm being cagey, not because I can't answer the question, but because I don't want to give stuff away.
Yeah, which is fair.
Fair.
So I am working on the sequel to First Strike. It hasn't been commissioned yet, but I have been writing it for a while. I was writing just before I came on air with you guys, actually. And Rocker in First Strike, obviously he didn't really come to much physical harm, but he saw things on Acreon and was told things that might have harmed him in other ways. And part of the sequel is Rocker trying to figure out how do you process some of the things that were suggested to him in First Strike. So plot armor. Yeah, it doesn't necessarily mean avoiding plot armor doesn't necessarily mean that characters, have to get shot, or they have to get, they have to lose a limb or something like that. But characters can come to harm in more ways than physical.
I think from a psychological,
I think that's a perfect tease.
Yeah, it is. I think from a psychological point of view in this world as well, it's quite interesting, because this is a world based of corporations. It's a not pleasant world. So the psychological element is not something you hear too much about, and the fact of living in this world would suck a lot of the time. And there will be a lot of things, especially from the enforcers, get sent to do things, and it's not like I compare it to other properties that Matt do. So that's why I always go back to Halo. It's not like Halo where these soldiers are bred to basically have no emotions and to go in and do these things, and there's no weight taken on it. The enforcers they're taking that weight. They're not Space Marines either. They're kind of like indoctrinated into this kind of system. The enforcers are definitely are more elite force, but they're also, from a psychological point, haven't been attuned to have no emotion. So it'll be cool to start to see that, especially how enforcers are always brought up as the ones that see the worst of the worst, starting to see what happens when people start breaking and start not handling that very well.
I mean, the option for psychological damage or non-physical damage is much more interesting than the hero losing a limb or an eye or something, because like advanced medicine, things can grow back. You get the cybernetical attachment or anything, and he's the same as before or even stronger, but emotional damage being affecting his decision in future plot is a much more interesting option for the reader and also for us on the tabletop, because it's like the force can go unharmed, but it's still affected in some way. So
there's a consequence.
I was just thinking, you mentioned, other super soldiers, from other franchises. I'd say that technically enforcers are indoctrinated in a way because they are made incapable of disobeying the will of the council. So there is an indoctrination. The other thing to remember is enforcers are a product, which I don't think the others are. Enforcers are a product just like, a new jet bike or a new food stuff. They're the creation of a society that is all about producing new things, new shiny things. So.
Well, I think the closest thing will probably be the Spartan 2s from Halo, is the fact that they were kidnapped when they were 3 or 5, and then bred to just be this one thing. And they've been genetically enhanced to not being able to have all those normal human feelings, and they're essentially just a Spartan that, that's all they do is fight, and that's the only thing they're used for. I can see some of the ties there, and it'll be interesting to see what an enforcer does when they no longer can be an enforcer. What happens in that scenario?
Well, maybe we will get there with the second book. So hopefully we will get that and a third and many more others.
Yeah.
So
Rock is going on a journey.
Yeah.
As many of the other characters from First Strike.
Yeah. And so get the book. Because I think we will see it if we sell enough.
Yes.
Yeah.
There is also there are many more characters and factions. I don't want to spoil anything in the book. I thought speaking about the enforcers and Roka would be a good point because he's on the cover, so we all know he's in there without spoiling anything. And I think it's a really interesting topic.
And we already know he will survive, so...
Yes. And we have the
yes, spoiler alert, Roka does survive.
For now.
But he's the only. There's only a couple of characters that we know survived. That get through First Strike. There are others whose fate is left intentionally ambiguous.
Perfect. So I want to maybe go away a bit from First Strike now. I think we all agree that we're looking forward to it hitting the shelves digitally and physically to really get into the story. But it's not the only thing you're doing or you've written. And you have written for about 10 years, I think, or nearly 10 years now. Time is flying.
10 years
the background for the Warpath Universe. And you're being one of the most active or the writer for the universe, especially in the last years. And how did it come to you to writing that much to create a universe, to create this background we are talking about, we are playing and we are enjoying pushing our toy soldiers and having theater of the mind besides that? So what was your starting point? Or
are you asking how did I get writing for Mantic? Or
yes. How did you
How did they sucker you into this?
The point where you and where was the point for yourself where you say, I really enjoy this. I want to do more with this.
Yeah.
I want to. You said that you choose parts of it that you like, and then you shape this universe.
I'm Brandon Rossbond of Winged Hussar Publishing. So much universe, so little time.
It was. I was a fan of Mantic first before there really was a Warpath Universe. I can't remember when Pandora came out. You guys all know Pandora?
Project Pandora, the 1 versus 1 dungeon crawler style.
Yeah, the original Corporate Marines versus Veer-myn in space. I can't remember if that was out or not. But Mantic, I really like what Mantic were doing. Like a lot of us, I was a big player of another company that makes things with which you might play. Maybe the listeners can figure out what company I'm referring to.
I'm baffled. I have no idea what.
Then Kickstarter. Right. Okay.
Could be 2 or 3.
Mantic. Kickstarter came out and it just obviously revolutionized what gaming could do, because suddenly you had this platform where small companies could reach players around the world and actually have them fund new products rather than having to go to a bank who doesn't understand the industry and, charges, ridiculous amounts of interest. And so when Mantic did their first Kickstarter for Kings of War, I got involved then and I backed it. I've never played Kings of War. I doubt I ever will. I've actually found my box full of my Kickstarter from Kings of War a couple of days ago. I was looking for something. But I just really wanted to support the company because I thought this is a company that's trying to, give people what they want. Big tables full of miniatures, big games, exciting games, and not emptying out their wallets while they did it. So I wanted to support that. Obviously, it worked. It did really well. That first Kickstarter did really well for Mantic. And when they announced the Dead Zone Kickstarter, for me, that was wonderful because I thought sci-fi is my thing. A sci-fi game on a Kickstarter from Mantic, from this company that I want to support. Oh, fantastic. This is something I'm going to get into. I'm actually going to play. So I backed that. And as part of that was where they first, I think they did a compilation. I think it's called, what's it called? Containment Protocols, I think was the compilation.
Yes, that's the first one.
Yeah. That was the first thing where they said, if you want to write a short story for us, put together a sample and send it in. And I did. I wrote a story called Fire Control featuring Wrath. Yeah, and I really liked Wrath. And the thing that really got me, and this is actually something else that's carried through in everything I've written since then, particularly about Enforcers. In the original, the tiny little 1-paragraph introduction for Wrath that was on the Dead Zone Kickstarter, it talked about how the corporations can do anything they want. They can research any kind of science or technology, except mind control. That is only for the Council of 7. And I just love that. I thought, you can totally go somewhere with that. Why are they forbidden from looking into mind control? Of course, it's because that's what the Council specializes in. That's the Council of 7's thing. And so, I also like the idea of Wrath going a bit nuts and killing some of the Council of 7. And so I wrote a story. They asked for a sample. And so I wrote sort of 200 words of really over-the-top violence. And they seemed to like that. They were like, yeah, great. Let's have some more of that. Write a story about that. And so then when the Warpath Kickstarter came, so we had Dead Zone, then we had Dreadball, which I also wrote for. And then the Warpath Kickstarter came out. And by then I felt like, man, I like writing. I like this universe. I like the company. I like what's happening. And I wouldn't recommend anybody listening try this. It may have been a one-off. But I went to a Mantic Open Day and Stuart Gibbs was standing alone at a table. And so I walked up to him and said, hi, would you like to pay me to write something for you? And he said, yeah, okay. And that was that. That was my job interview.
Wait, how much did they pay you though? I mean, if they gave you only $1, I don't think it was worth it.
Yeah, he knew my name because he'd read the Wrath story and the story that was in the percentage play that's in the Dreadball Extreme compilation. And so he was like, yeah, what do you want to write? What do you want to write for us? And I said, I want to write Warpath. And I ended up writing most of the source book.
I think
how much freedom did you get for writing the stories, or did you get a rough summary what should be in there, or just completely do your own thing and just start?
Yeah, there there was a bare bones for the Warpath universe. So some things, so obviously the factions existed, so the Enforcers and the GCPS and the Asterians, and there was some sort of biology and some basic flavour of what these factions were. But yeah, I can't. I can't remember ever being told no, you can't do that. We can't have that in there. So generally, I seem to get away with most things. I tend to write everything I write for Mantic. I always tend to think this is the last thing I'm ever going to write for Mantic. They're never going to ask me to write anything again. So I tend to put in stuff that's just like completely stupid. Because I think if this is my last chance to write something for Mantic, then I'm going to put this in there. Like if you look through the source book, if you go carefully through the source book, you're going to find a lot of Motorhead song titles in there, and a lot of Metallica and Megadeth titles worked in there. I've just I generally that seems to work. Mantic seems to like that if I just write the stuff that's a little bit out there.
Is there anything that you've written?
Not only Mantic.
Is there anything you've written in there that you're worried someone's going to discover and bring up again?
Like what?
Like something that you're like.
Now you got me worried. Now you're going to say, okay, what about this?
No, just something you're throwing in there as a bit of a joke that if someone took seriously and added it, like enforced it in canon, you're going to get some questions from Matt. Like, why did you do this?
I don't think so. I don't write silly things just for the sake of it. But I just sort of feel like I'm going to get stuff in there. I mean, if you've listened to the Dead Zone podcast, I talked there about how Ingolf Christensen, I have to be careful how I say his name, is based on my father-in-law, because I wanted to put my father-in-law in the book, and so I just wrote this really mean, cantankerous, surly dwarf. Because my father-in-law is completely the opposite to that, and he's really sweet and really lovely. But Ingolf Christensen is a pretty good character, I think. He works. He's fun to play with on the table. He's got a big dog. There's nothing. I don't put stuff in there that I think people are going to go what. But yeah, I put stuff in there that I think if this is the last thing I ever get to write, I'm going to save it. Yeah.
The only thing I've ever gone what on is the hint that there's like some dark space dwarfs that are like in the center of the universe. Like that. And that's the only time I went like, why is this not explored more? Come on. Like, this is a prime opportunity.
Hey.
Some things have to stay a mystery.
Email Ronnie. Are you not a fan of Dark Star Dwarfs, Matthias?
A little bit.
I think
they are absolutely a part of canon, and they're there because you have to remember that the galaxy is absolutely vast, and even Asterian space, it's not just all Asterians in Asterian space. I mean the Matsudan obviously are now a playable faction, but there are plenty of other races within Asterian space that we just haven't seen yet. And I think it's the same for the Forge Fathers. Forge Fathers are a type of dwarf. They're not the only dwarfs that live, that exist. And Dark Star Dwarfs are there as well. They are a thing as well. They definitely exist. And they may or may not have a part to play in the future.
Here's a question.
I love that approach.
Just to follow up on the dwarf thing, are Brockers a different subspecies, or are they just a different clan?
Brokers are the clan broken by the GCPS.
Yeah.
Okay. So yeah.
Yeah.
I've always been
they're technically Forge Fathers, but they're sort of exiled and low caste sort of thing.
Yeah, it started to remind me of Kings of War, how you got the free dwarfs, the dwarfs, and the abyssal dwarfs. So the star dwarfs are the abyssal dwarfs, and then you got the Forge Fathers, which is the dwarfs, and then you got the Brockers, which are the free dwarfs. It feels like there's some kind of link there, because Roddy loves dwarfs. He makes a point that he really loves dwarfs, so I wouldn't be surprised if we don't see that in the future.
I mean, there can never be enough dwarfs, so
I initially wrote a pitch for the summer campaign that we just had, because I misunderstood the brief that I was being given by Matt Gilbert. I thought he was asking me to write a background for a campaign based around Epic Warpath. And so I started thinking about how could you justify this massive explosion in warfare? Like, how can you, in a story sense, move things up a gear? And so I started thinking about what would be the most cataclysmic thing that could happen, principally to the GCPS, that would affect everybody else. And there may or may not have been a Dark Star Dwarf involved in that.
That's cool.
Oh,
that's a bit of a hint.
But that's the thing. But that idea, I couldn't fit it into the Epic Warpath book because then Matt explained, okay, that's a great idea, but the campaign is completely unrelated to the Epic Warpath book. And I couldn't fit my idea into the Epic Warpath book that's coming out later this year. So at the moment, it lives as a potential novel that would come after the sequel to First Strike.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay, I think that would be something really interesting to explore. We have many open ends in the lore, which is a really good point, a strong point, where we can have our imagination go wild with the Asterians and the Forge Brothers. So
let me follow up a question here, because how do you avoid the galaxy to become small? Because the galaxy is vast. There are a lot of species, a lot of empires we haven't explored, a lot of open ends. And how do you avoid everything coming together? Because if the one character you like is everywhere, or the one conflict is central to all forces, things start to become small again, because distances have no meaning anymore if the one enforcer or roker is on all the spots.
Yeah.
Oh, he won't be. That's absolutely, Rocker has got his arc up towards his arc. I don't mean the death arc. Rocker's got his own story arc, and he's currently busy doing his thing. There are plenty of other forward observers, if there were to be a forward observer in a story. But that's happening. What Rocker is up to, First Strike, that happens up in the sort of northwest sectors of the galaxy. There's other stuff happening all over the galaxy that could have its own, main cast of characters. I try and spread things out. I wrote the Cerberus Maw as being in a very different location for that reason. Not everything is happening where the Death Arc is. It has. A lot of the action has historically been towards the Death Arc because we've gone from Dead Zone and we've moved forwards through Warpath and Firefight. But there's plenty of other places in the galaxy. It's just about. Really, it comes down to Mantic saying we want to focus on this thing happening. We want something to happen somewhere, and then it can be written.
I think what also helps is age of characters, because it has been established that humans can live to 120, 150 plus. You can get clones. I think Lucky Logan is on his 15th clone or something like that, according to the lore. So I guess the risk of all the action happening around one system. There is obviously a risk to it when the universe is a universe and it's massive. I think it's just because we don't really have so many storytellers happening in the universe at the moment. It's typically we always just focus on one particular area for a period of time, and then we move over to another. I think if we start to see more novels come out, more stories and all that, I think we're going to start to see the universe not being too constrained. I think that's what you're going for there, Matthias, is that there is a risk of just everything happening in the force sphere or one part of the force sphere all the time.
Yeah. I'd love to see it. I'd love to see, stories happening, all over. As I say, things were going to happen, in 2020, and if it hadn't been for COVID, who knows where we'd be at now. We might be on the, 16th Rocker novel by now. Everybody knows sick of it no more. But yeah, it would be great to see. None of you guys have any of you guys got a story in the Epic Warpath compilation that's coming out? I can't remember.
No.
Who wrote for that? No. So the Epic Warpath compilation that's coming out. That's got a lot of writers in it. it'd be great to see more people, being able to write more books in the Warpath universe. I'd love to hear more about things. I have lots of ideas, but I only have so much time.
Yeah, and
but it would be lovely to see.
Yeah, and just to add on to that, sorry, Matthias, go.
No, do you, as a writer, want to close the gaps, or are you comfortable with leaving stuff open for later, or to never actually finish a story? It's like having a vast universe and having mysteries around is an interesting point. But if you feel, you need to finish this now because you can't leave it like that.
Do you mean like the overarching galaxy storylines, or like individual kind of fiction stories?
Or both, or like some little hints you put in there,
keeping things
just
open-ended,
for leaving a little mystery and never coming back.
I've been leaving Easter eggs since I first started writing for Mantic. I'm always writing, thinking about it'll be really cool in 10 years' time when this pays off. And I mean that literally. The stuff I'm working on for the sequel to First Strike, calls back strongly to the first story I ever wrote for Mantic, at the Fire Control featuring Wrath. So I'm because I like a growing universe that's constantly happening, and I love seeing things cropping up in different places. So every story has an ending. So First Strike has an end, right? There's a pretty conclusive ending to First Strike, but then it also leaves enough threads that you can then have the sequel, and what happens to the characters from First Strike. And the same with stuff that I've written. Cerberus Maw was the last expansion pack I wrote, and that can go in so many directions. There are so many stories can be told around Cerberus Maw. So every story has to have its own ending, but I'm always putting stuff in there that can lead on to other things.
And I would add in.
I think.
Sorry, Claudio.
Dave, go on. I
was going to say, just to add on a comment that you mentioned last time, how you just walked into Mantic and offered to the writing services. You believe it or not, that happens quite a lot within the Mantic community. I mean, there's a lot of books that are in the Kings of War branch of things that have come from just fans making a pitch to Winged Hussar, and Winged Hussar going, that's actually a pretty good idea. Brandon Response is really good with that kind of stuff. So, I think Mike Rossi is a good example. He has his own Mantic podcast, his own podcast that he talks about models and so forth, and he's really into the universe. And all he was is a fan that wrote a story, and someone that on the Mantic Universe podcast recently is having a book come out as well. Based off a story that he wrote. So, it's not too far-fetched to be able to just have a really good pitch or story and then just approach Mantic and probably not less Mantic, probably more Brandon, because Brandon's pretty much the focal point for everything that he does get published. So I wouldn't discourage anyone out there. If you've got a similar idea of what Chris did, just reach out to maybe Brandon from Winged Hussar, or even Mantic themselves, which is with a pitch and see how it goes. So I would definitely encourage it, because the more voices we have in this universe, the more it's going to grow.
Yeah, I'd love to see more compilations and more people writing stuff and and having a go. Are you guys familiar with Kevin Smith? Does everybody know who Kevin Smith is? Or is it like that a really old reference?
No, I got it. Mallrats and he's Silent from Jay and Silent Bob. He's Silent Bob.
Yeah, Silent Bob. Clarks and Clarks 2 and Clarks 3.
Yeah.
Did
you call it Clark?
He's
Clarks. I thought it was Clerks.
Clarks. No, it's Clarks.
Clerks?
It's Clerks. It's Clerks in our part of the world, but in America it's Clarks.
Really? I did not know that. I thought it was always Clerk.
Yeah.
All right.
In our parts of the world, it's a big stretch, though.
Yeah.
Anyway, so Kevin Smith is an inspiration in the sense that when he first started doing podcasts, I was listening to one of his podcasts, and he talks a lot about how he got his start in the film industry, right? Which was that he went to film school, hated it, dropped out, then took out as many loans as he could on credit cards, got as many credit cards as he could, wrote a script, and financed a movie which he filmed in the convenience store where he was working. And it turned out to be a big hit. And he's, as he puts it, he's spun it out into a career that's lasted, 20, 30, 40 years at this point. And on his podcast, he said, look, I'm just a fat loser from New Jersey. If I can do it, maybe you can, right? If this fat, talentless loser from New Jersey can somehow spin out a career in Hollywood, right, then what can you do? And that was part of my inspiration for just thinking, well, yeah, maybe I can write. Maybe I can have a go at writing. And it's worked out okay.
And a lot of
turns out I'm okay at writing.
I mean, there's a bit of a message there, because a lot of people think if you make something, you have to release it. And no, you could make a YouTube video and never release it and just do it for yourself. You can write a book and do it for yourself as well. It's just all about doing it. And if you want to show other people, go ahead and do it. I mean, a lot of people just have this, it has to be successful, or it has to be, seen by other people in order for it to be deemed as, a success, or if it's worth continuing on. You can just do it and then go from there. I think that's the hardest bit. Hardest bit of doing anything is starting. And a lot of people just trip up on that starting line.
Have a go. You never know.
Exactly.
Never know until you have a go.
Exactly.
I mean, I'm really happy that you had a go, because looking back at the first edition Dead Zone books, I went through them last summer, and there are many things. I mean, the lore was there, a few tidbits, but for example, the GCPS was just the corporation, and so it wasn't the thing, the behemoth we know right now. So I think that was also one of your decisions, I guess, to make from the corporation to the thing we know now, with the Council of Seven being more prominent and the corporations maybe being a bit more doing their own thing, because the name, the corporation, sometimes is still, I think, in the Firefight lore and so on, it's still there as a name, but you've changed it, right?
Yeah, I'd honestly forgotten, but yeah, it was called the corporation, wasn't it? Originally, it was the corporation. That might even be what it says in the Pandora boxed set.
Yes.
Yeah, I didn't say let's call it the GCPS. It was that definitely existed before I started writing for Warpath. So I'm not sure how that came about.
But I think the concept, I think Pandora was from 2012, 11-12, because I know that I started with Dwarf King's Hold, so the predecessor, the fantasy one, was my first game that I've played, and I was totally hooked, got Pandora, and then the Dead Zone Kickstarter came along, and I went all in as a university student. I don't know where I got the funds, don't ask. So, but I know that there was a change, and I think right now, because the corporation feels like one entity, and what I like about the GCPS, apart from the name, but the whole structure, that so many corporations that there isn't really one unity, but there is the council doing also their own thing, and so many others just greedy, profit driven, and I think it makes it much more interesting, and you can also do many more stories with that, because it leaves more open ends, more imagination when we're playing on the tabletop. Many players don't care about doing canon things, but they want to have fun in their own army, and I think it's the perfect place to find your niche where you're comfortable in.
It also keeps the galaxy large, because you don't have this one human empire that controls everything, but you have this thousands of small star empires, all being human, all being a company, all doing the profit thing. So it keeps things vast and separated. I really like that aspect of the noise. So you don't have this single human identity that's like something in Utopia here. So
I get that exactly. And so I have a follow-up question on that point. Would you be down to doing like a deep dive into the corporations? Because in the source book, we got a few more names. We had a few before. In the source book, we have a few like that have their standing armies and so on. But often it's just a bit like a name and maybe what they are doing and nothing more. So while it's a vast universe, sometimes it feels a bit like we don't really know anything in detail. Isn't that something you'd like to explore, or is it like coming along?
It's the sort of thing that would be you could do if we did a new version of the source book. I mean, that would be the ideal, wouldn't it? To sort of revisit the whole universe again, and incorporate all the new stuff that's been published since the source book came out, which was a long time ago now. And it would be great to really kind of dive into the structure of some of these corporations. It's just another thing. Yes, I would love to see it. It comes down to really to Mantic saying, this is important to us as well.
I mean, it is important for us, for the players, because some guidelines help always. I mean, I really like the part of the last source book where a single enforcer company was explained in detail, like that's the colors, that's the structure, how this is the unit they serve in, this is the commander. It isn't a lot, but it adds so much more immersion for the gaming point that you know how things work on the larger scale, and like having 4 or 5 different corporations, this is the forces, their colors, the organization, this is the names of the lieutenants and things like that. I mean, I don't know, this is also something I liked from another game like Battletech had all these small source books, like really fleshed out details of a single company with like, this is the 12 people, this is their equipment, these are the names, this is their history, things like that. And this is really something big for players when they want to look into the things. Also for developing their own armies, because you need some guidelines how things work.
Yeah.
Or what you can expect.
Yeah, maybe that's something that, going forwards, because so what tends to happen for me, so for example, for Firefight 2.0, so Matt Gilbert came to me and said, okay, so we're going to do a two-player set. It's going to be enforcers on one side, orcs on the other. You've got this many words, go. And so then I write the story, and I'm thinking, okay, I've got to write a story that fits the models that come in the box, that explains why these models are fighting, but also is kind of expandable, so that if you want to play with more models, that would fit as well. So it kind of comes down to word count. I can see why going forwards, maybe that's something that we should think about doing, is having more of those sort of force org charts that sort of explain how the armies fight. Because I didn't write. I mean, I love that you loved that bit from the Enforcer book, because I didn't write that, but I love that you love it.
I think one of the good kind of comparisons is, and I know we're going to hate saying it, but
of course, asking the bad credit.
Yeah. As chapters,
Michael Gray, I believe, wrote that.
It's like chapters from 40K.
Yeah, it was a corporation.
And that's what this kind of feels like. Corporations could be like the equivalent of like how we go with 40K. We do individual chapters, and they have their own look and the way of fighting. You could say corporations could go down that look, and I think Maison Labs is a good example of the direction it could possibly take. Is that Maison Labs has become its own. It was technically a corporation before, it became its own faction. Now it's its own faction. It's got its own uniqueness to it, and it's got its own colors and so forth. You could see that of people coming up with their own corporation, and then if they've got a template to go off of that, there's several different corporations that are their own factions, and this is the different variations that can look like on the actual tabletop. You can definitely see people taking that route and incorporating their own looks into, if they've got really a basis to go off. I think until we've really got a couple of those corporations kind of laid out, like these are the colors, this is the way these GCPS armies can actually look on the table when they're actually part of a corporation. I think we're going to start to see a lot of that kind of stuff start to come into the game and into the universe as a whole.
This is Andy from Mantic Games, and you're listening to the Mantic Universe podcast. So much universe, so little time.
I just, when we did the source book, I just don't. The problem is me, because I did think about that, particularly. So with the Asterians, for example. So I wrote the Asterian section in the source book, and I wrote about how rigid the Asterian society is, and it's all about routine rituals, and they've got incredible technology, and they're doing all this sort of stuff. And I wrote about their history with the Scourge, as they called it, and what became of how that turned into the plague. And then I wrote some clade names so that people would have something to start from, right? So this is what an Asterian clade kind of sounds like. And I did think at the time, should I be describing, kind of their colors? But I kind of thought, well, other people can decide for themselves. If you decide that Wailing Song is all red, like mine are, then that's fine. But if you decide they're all in green and gold, then that's fine as well. Maybe going forwards, it would be lovely to have those kind of army book approaches. Maybe I'll think about that. If Mantic ever asks me to write anything again, and it's an expansion pack, then maybe I'll bear that in mind. That's if that's what people want, then we can do that.
I think it was the perfect starting point. The source book was so incredibly valuable to the universe because it had the history. How it all came together. We got some details, but then again, we got just a few names here and there that we know that the clades exist, that corporations exist, and so on. But I think now, like 10 years later, I think people feel the need. We have Maison Labs, and I love it, and I love the way it grew. Like I think it was just a name in the Nexus Psi first edition book for Dead Zone, where it was like a medical facility and research facility and nothing more. And then came Star Saga, and now it's one of the biggest players in the whole universe on the human scale, but also like with things
also
happening.
The source of all evil.
Yes, it's always there, and I really love it. And I think people like Maison Labs, and it shows that maybe we're at a point where we can go a bit deeper into a few clades, a few corporations, a few things here and there, and I'm all down for it because it's just the more we get to know how the things work, the better. And then again, it's still big and open enough to do our own thing. And I think the balance is always a bit hard to get.
And it adds that personality, It adds that color that, you look at a battlefield. And we've seen this with Dreadball as well. It's like you can look at all the Dreadball teams and they are sponsored by a corporation. The majority of them are. So you can look at them and get a sense of what are the corporation colors based off that, even based off the away jersey. I think Trontech 49ers, I think they're called. That's a good example of like they're blue and white. So every time now I see Trontech as a corporation, I see them as blue and white. I don't see them as any other color. And, even though technically if you're going to make a GCPS army of them, there's nothing to indicate that they should be that color on the field. But in my mind, they are. And so that just instantly you see that, you kind of tie them in together and you can really start to kind of play around with it. And because it's a corporation, it's not like what some of the other factions, and I'm not going to hide saying like it's not like a chapter from 40k where there's only a certain amount of chapters and there all had to be branches off the original 7 and stuff like that. Corporations are corporations. It can be whatever you want it to be, whatever color scheme you want it to be. It doesn't need to be tied. If you want to make it work in lore as well, like it can be whatever you want. So I would love to see someone make a McDonald's themed GCPS army. How hilarious would that be? like a Grimace tank or something like that. It would be amazing. But people can like incorporate real life ones into it. I think we need to start seeing that for those ideas to flow in, because GCPS, it feels like it's all just one big army. It's not. It's just all these corporations that we're using the same units for. All right, so what I'll do is I'll ask a question from our Discord. So if you do in the future want to ask a question to anyone that we do an interview, jump onto our Discord, post a little question, and we'll bring it up Yeah. So the first one actually comes from Chris, the founder of the Mantic Universe podcast. So this is going to be for you, Chris. Actually, for everybody, we'll start with Chris because it's be good to get his perspective from him first. So what makes the Warpath universe stand out in a crowded sci-fi field? So what's your gut saying?
Well, funny enough, I was thinking when you were talking just now about having Trontech, the Trontech uniform for the Dreadball players being the same as one for the Marines. I thought, man, that's pretty much Warpath in a nutshell, there, isn't it? The corporation sports team wears the same colours as its Marine expeditionary forces. It's all about greed. It's all about greed. Warpath is all about greed. It's about a universe with infinite resources, and it's not enough for anybody. Everybody wants more.
That's a good answer. Like 40K is all about sadness and everything going horribly wrong, and the Warpath universe is about greed. There you go. And the future is looking really bright for humanity. At least we know that. What about Matthias and Claudio? How do you, and in a short sentence, because we know we're lore buffs and we can go on for a while, what makes the Warpath universe stand out in a crowded field for you two?
Matthias, you go first.
Well, a tricky one. I like the faction diversity and the progressive timeline, because a static universe has its advantages, but when everything always happening at the same time, like this 5 minutes before the apocalypse, it gets boring by the time. And another point is, if there are only humans in sci-fi or only humans and one or two other factions, it gets also boring because it's not really something to explore. So I like about Warpath that we have so much diversity in there, so much possibilities, and still progressing in things. Like we have added the Matsudan in the Asterians, who got the origin story in a progressive. They started out as a faction within the GCPS, get supported as a rebellion with the Asterians, now using their technology. This is one part I really like, and what's standing out here compared to others. While I have to say I'm also a big Battletech fan regarding the lore, but they are only humans within their faction, within different human factions. So that's like where things are different.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like that point. And I've already mentioned it. I'm a big fan of the progression. When I read that the Exam 4 story got evolved in the Dead Zone 3rd edition and Firefight then especially, so that it progressed from the 2nd edition expansion, I was a fan. I was completely hooked in that moment. So I really get that point. But I have my own take why I think it stands out, and I think because it's rather livable. It's a horrific future where greed and corporations are everything, and still they are getting backstabbed by the Council of Seven and so on. So it's a bit like a dictatorship or a circle of dictators and corporations. So only the best, but still it feels like all the diverse races are getting along. We have Dreadball, where everyone is involved somehow, even if it's sometimes only a scam. We have trade between Forge Fathers and GCPS. We have agreements between Asterians and GCPS. We have Marauders who are mercenaries, but have their own agenda. So I feel like, in theory, everyone could live together happily ever after. It doesn't happen that way, of course. But it feels like there is some kind of hope. Maybe that's the Reps player in me saying we just need a big bang and then there is hope for the universe. But I feel like it's not just, it's something where you can say, okay, I think it's reasonable that people live there and aren't just slaves to war or work.
It feels much more grounded and realistic than some other gaming universes out there.
Yes, exactly. Because, I mean, it's a war game, or they are most of the time we have war games excluding Dreadball and Overdrive, so there has to be an escalation, and we have conflicts escalating in the past years in universe and out of universe that drive it forward, and maybe we have the Nameless, we have Ingolf Krestosson going wild because he doesn't like the humans.
You can't have a war tabletop game without the war. I mean, otherwise it's just awkward.
Yes.
It's just miniatures standing across.
But this is also an interesting point here. We have non-war games in this universe, which is a very interesting point that not many other universes or games franchise have, because it's like we started out with a non-war game because Dreadball was one of the first games in this universe before there was Firefight and things like that. So it's just this. So like we started with a sports game that is still competitive and about the cooperation and fleshing out the background, because we get so many alien factions out of that game that are still not explored in the other games. But it's like the whole thing started from a very different point, and not just from it's all apocalypse and war. We started out with sports.
And you got Star Saga in there, Dungeon Crawler. So that adds more possibilities of like just going on missions and just having this smaller game that you can, just do a mission of squad of 4 and go through it. And I mean, I hope Star Saga does have a bit of a comeback, just the way Dungeon Saga Origins came back. I hope it does, but as you said, there's so many avenues that you can go down of like, this doesn't have to just be a war game, this universe as well. You got sports game. And, just to answer the question as well, is what I like about the universe is that there's so much potential for this to be explored of a race that you want. I mean, one of the hardest things that I struggle, I'm going to say GW because I'm not afraid of them. One of the hardest things I have with GW is there is a bit of restriction of the races that you can pick. And a lot of the time they said, no, we can't do that because, Old World is a good example of like the reason why they weren't bringing in certain races is because, the time period doesn't match up, this doesn't match up. I think with the Warpath Universe, the door is more open to pick whatever you want with the scale that you want, because you've got, now we've got like essentially 4 different scales, right? We've got the Epic Warpath, we've got Firefight, we've got Dead Zone, and then you've got Dreadball. And one race I would love to see a fighting Dead Zone or Firefight force is the races from Siberia. So all the the Sangar, which is the shark, and the Zeppelin, which is like a squid kind of race, and the Cypher, which is basically a hammerhead shark kind of humanoid race. I would love for them to become their own thing. And this is a world that is a realistic potential. That it could have its own Dead Zone force, but what also could escalate to be its own Firefight force one day. You never know if there's enough love there.
And I have you mentioned Star Saga right now, Dave, and I want to piggyback there because Star Saga, Chris, you wrote the whole background to the characters and to the missions and so on, and I really liked how it. I mean, Mason Labs, we already talked about it.
We need more Blaine.
Yes, we have Blaine in there, but also I think we had I don't know if you know that, but last year for Dead Zone, themed lists were released, and the first one, where I think the plan wasn't to release that many at first, maybe, but the first one was the crew from the IRAS contract, so the original Star Saga characters, and I'm so hoping that we see more about them, more lore, because we have the tidbits from Star Saga, but it's a dungeon crawler. So I really hope that they return somehow in a more, written out way.
Could be another trilogy.
Me too.
So I think not only Roth.
I was going to ask Chris, if there was a character that you haven't written for yet in the Warpath universe, is there a particular character that you're like, it would be interesting to explore that? Or at the moment, it's more of a case of you could write about any of them, you'll be happy.
a character I haven't written for yet.
Yeah, so a character that maybe you've put a footnote for, or you put in the source book, but you haven't really explored. I always would love to know about Lucky Logan and all those clones and how that kind of worked out. Because every time one dies, they just keep cloning, and then there was one of the clones that went through a portal and then eventually came back out because they thought he died. I would love to know more about those characters. So I was just wondering whether in your days of writing everything, just random characters down as you were fleshing out, was there one particular character you're like, actually, I want to go back there?
Yeah, I'm chuckling because I watched Mickey 17 today, and I'm hearing you describe Lucky Logan. I'm wondering whether Mantic's lawyers should be getting involved because there's some striking similarities. Yeah, too many clones not being dead when they're supposed to be. Again, not wanting to give anything away.
Yeah.
I liked. There's a couple of characters I have written stuff for that hasn't yet seen the light of day, and I'd kind of quite like to find a way of getting that stuff out there. The Star Saga characters, I would absolutely love to write more about the Star Saga characters. I was reading through the Star Saga book, the background book a couple of months ago, and I'd forgotten some of the stuff that I'd wrote, and I thought, man, I'd love to see these characters come back and have a bit more of a life. Yeah, so
we've
Star
seen
Saga
them
guys.
on the tabletop again, so maybe there is a way in for people who haven't played Star Saga to get them to know better. And I mean, it's a nice window into the universe, the mercenary side, which all about greed. So you can go wild there, or Mantic can go wild there, and you can too.
Star Saga. The Star Saga characters don't feature in Crash Protocol, bringing it back to First Strike, the Alpha Strike edition. But there's a definite Easter egg in Crash Protocol for fans of Star Saga. Character that's in there. I'd love to write those guys again. I really enjoyed writing all of those guys. It'd be great to see them have further adventures.
Okay, then it's our job to put pressure on Mantic to show that we really want to have those named characters feature a bit more, have a story about them, what they are doing. I mean, a few were mentioned in the Tertia summer campaign last year, Dolinsky as the leader. So there are some connections here and there, and I hope something more will happen. And
they're kind of made. The Star Saga setting is kind of made for novelization, isn't it?
Yes.
There's an awful lot of stories you could tell about these dudes getting sent on missions by Blaine. Contact Winterzar, tell them that they have to commission Star Saga novels, and it will happen.
I will start a bot army right now. And on another note, again, piggybacking from Star Saga a bit, but also from Dead Zone Escalation, the Nameless. Because I think the Nameless are one of the factions who are still a bit, I don't know, maybe unknown, because we had a few pages of lore when they came out. We had the score on Argolis, we had the Star Saga expansion, where they were introduced as a fighting force, because before we only knew them from Dreadball. Mm-hmm. And then we had the Ugurup sect, and I think it's a really interesting point to say, okay, there's a big empire, or like a big conglomerate, whatever, of these races, and then we have a few who are gaining power and traction, and they are the ones who are fighting now. And more from releases like I think it was the Operation Heracles set, where in the fluff, the Nameless were coming and destroying, aquaforming the planet. Now, the same happened with the summer campaign. Now they are getting a big army in Epic Warpath. So it's escalating, and they are really mysterious, and that's what quite I like about them. But still, I'm longing for more. And you wrote the background for them. Is it something where you say, okay, it's better to leave them alone because they should be like those otherworldly beings, or do you think no, let's double down and go all out?
I write what Mantic tell me to write. Mantic tells me write about the name list. I'm like, okay, great, let's do that. Let's go into that. Yeah, they've grown as a faction, haven't they? I don't know how Mantic does their sort of market research, but yeah, it's interesting what the community loves, what the community really gets into. Like, you mentioned Maison, Maison Labs being really, really popular. I can't even remember how I settled on them as being the bad guys in Star Saga. But yeah, and now they've got their own army and everything. Yes, the names have grown, and they've grown from being sort of a little, just entirely enigmatic in Dreadball. I think it was John Doe, wasn't it? John Doe was their one character that was in Dreadball. Yeah, and people just seem to like them. They feature in the Epic book because obviously they've got a big army now. I remember when they first started becoming a faction, trying to decide, are they more fishy, or are they more like Cthulhu type monsters? Mm-hmm. And they've ended up being kind of a mix of the two. So they're kind of Cthulhu-ish in their beliefs because they have all these cults and they worship all these odd gods. But they tend to have a sort of slightly aquatic theme, and a lot of them are named after sort of aquatic things and aquatic features. Remind me what the original question was, because I'm sort of rambling now.
I think it was about like, do you want them to be a bit more developed, and maybe even what's most appealing for you?
Yeah, as I say, I will write whatever the community wants, whatever Mantic tells me. This is what we need to develop, because it depends on what the community wants to play. If the community likes the nameless and likes playing them and wants them to be better organized and better described, then that's what will happen. Same as with the Asterians or Maison or any other corporation. Whatever the community wants is what will happen.
Interesting.
I think one last point to the nameless for me would be I really love the saying, I'm paraphrasing here, about the GCPS being like a big carcass from a space whale that needs to be like harvested. I think that for me that's the focal point about the nameless, because that's some cosmic horror thing, because of space whale and harvesting and so on. And still, how are they going about it? They're aquaforming planets. So that's for me the key feature, and I'm really looking forward to where they are going.
The Mantic Universe podcast. So much universe, so little time.
Yeah, the names are pretty horrible. I've written, well, you'll see in the Epic Warpath book. You don't want to lose to the nameless.
That sounds ominous.
Okay.
Yeah, great.
They don't take a lot of prisoners. Let's just say they don't take a lot of prisoners.
Wow.
So back to the roots with your gory novel about Wrath.
Are you trying to make it as depressing as the 40k universe now? Like you've got the greed down. Let's bring in the sadness and the depressingness of it all.
It's not. That's the thing, though. It's not really a depressing universe, is it? Because it's all about everything's fantastic. We're for the GCPS, they are constantly coming up with new innovations and new exciting products and new things and new worlds to conquer. Like if that other universe is all about doom and gloom, the Warpath universe, it's about opportunity. You can join, you can be a Marine, and you can fight all these other monstrous aliens on all kinds of exciting worlds. And at the end of it, we might give you a piece of land, that you can go and live on. And look at this fantastic gun. Look at this fantastic gun we've got and this incredible rocket launcher. It's all very, very exciting.
It's a bit Roman auxiliaries. Yeah, you get the citizenship, veterancy, piece of land, maybe piece of equipment.
Yeah.
You see other parts of the world.
Meet exciting people and stick a knife in them. And that's the thing. They are pretty horrific. But the nameless, like I say, it's all about greed. The nameless just want more and more and more, and they see a victim in the GCPS. They see something that is too big to sustain itself, and they're willing to, chop it up and take it home in little pieces. Not that the GCPS is their only enemy. Not the GCPS is not the Nameless's only enemy. There are other races who butt heads, as it were.
All right. Well, we'll move on to our final question, because we've been talking for nearly an hour and a half, which feels like it's gone really quickly. So we'll jump back to our Patreon. Actually, we'll ask a Patreon question from Veer-myn. He asked Martin. I try to use his username because I don't know whether he's okay with that. He asked, what was or is your main inspiration for the Warpath universe? Because you mentioned throwing in some Motorhead song. Is there anything that you're like, all right, this is actually a more of a direct reference, or you're inspired by? I mean, obviously you've got all the tropes. You could fish all through the sci-fi history and always find inspiration from everywhere. But I guess, is there something specific that you draw particular inspiration from?
Difficult to say, because I've written so many different factions and so many different settings. Everything's got a different inspiration and a different starting point.
Is there one particular faction you're like, this is actually a direct reference to that?
No, sorry to give the boring answer.
That's all right.
But no,
sometimes the answer
really.
doesn't have it. I think, yeah, that's right.
And to be honest, I think that's one of the strengths, because when we did our first episode about the Warpath universe, we had the same, how can we compare the universe and maybe the factions and so on? And it's not that easy. And I think that's one of the biggest strengths. I mean, there are a few tropes. You recognize the dwarves being dwarves.
Yeah.
That's fine. But overall, the universe is still very unique, even with many tropes we know. And so I think that's a good mix. And I think it's a perfect answer that no, there isn't really the one inspiration for that, because it makes sense if I'm looking at the universe as a whole.
Yeah.
I mean, I can just remember a very early take on when Alessio Cavatore talked about the GCPS, and he said he thought about being the East Indian Company in space.
Yeah, very true. I like that.
That makes sense.
I like that comparison. I guess from now's a good time to plug the wiki. So me and Claudio established initially the fandom wiki, which we've now moved over to an actual wiki, which I built from scratch. So the Warpath Universe wiki.com, if you out there do want to look it up. We're slowly building it out, transferring what was over to the fandom wiki to this one, and we're kind of fleshing it out. If you scroll to the bottom, you can see us actually building in all the races and actually giving the unique art to every single one, and we hope to get there. But the reason I mentioned that is really a question for you, Chris. How do you keep track of it all? Do you have an ongoing document? Is it something that you hope that Mantic keep track of? Is it more of just that you hope you just remember?
Yeah, I have to tread a bit more carefully than I used to, because there's an awful lot of stuff out there.
Yeah,
they used to be. I used to rely on Stuart Gibbs. Used to be really good at that. So when he was head of the studio, so if I'd start, if I wrote stuff and I'd send it in, then he'd come back and say, "Hang on a minute, aren't these guys dead?" Or didn't these guys do something over here? And they'd be like, "Oh yeah, I totally forgot about that." I just try and be very careful, and I Google a lot. So, if you want to put stuff on the Wikipedia page, that might be helpful.
Okay.
So a lot of Googling, a lot of going back over previous files. My drive is full of stuff. So a lot of searching through my Google Drive to make sure that I'm not contradicting myself.
That's fair. We'll build out the wiki for you. And if anyone out there does want to help out, the wiki does exist to be a collaborative effort. So if you do want to chip in, you've got a particular race that you've got a lot of knowledge on, you want to throw that on there, you can always sign up to the wiki. We also have a Discord specifically just for the wiki if you want to help us out, because there's only so much I can do. There's only so much Claudio can do. I do the majority of the Kings of War wiki myself, and I've now got the Mantic Games wiki going as well, and there's only so much I can do. So if you want to help out, definitely reach out. So I guess
so much universe, so little time.
yeah,
I tried.
way too much universe, way too much universe, not enough time. So I guess we'll start to wrap up things there. Is there any final questions from you, Claudio or Matthias, you want to throw at Chris?
Or Chris, do you have any questions for us too? Because we were like torturing you with our takes and questions.
Yeah, all right. I've got one for each of you. In one sentence or less.
Oh God!
If you could make me write anything, what would it be? Like, if you were in charge at Mantic and you could make me write anything, what would it be? What would you want to see?
Blaine.
Oh, that's a good one. Blaine's an interesting one because he's in Kings of War too.
He's everywhere. Another.
In a novel or a source book style?
Oh, you tell me.
Oh God!
I would like a trilogy with Blaine, or with many Blaines, or whatever he is. It's just like, or each book about a different Blaine. Keep the mystery around.
So like maybe 5 or 6 books, and it's about a different Blaine, and then the final one they all meet up and fight or something.
Yeah.
It sounds like a
Doctor
good
Who
idea.
kind of scenario.
We don't talk about Blaine fighting.
Yeah. All right. I've got one. The GCPS conquering of home planets. So we're talking about the taking of Superior. So that's all those aquatic races. We're talking about all those races that are like the Teraton Empire. We're talking about all those races that have been taken over and that become essentially ribs. And it's kind of like, I don't know if you ever read Rise of Celestians, but basically it's a snapshot in time over a course of like 200 years where it just takes a period of time and just fleshes out what happened during that time. And so you get a snapshot of how all these worlds essentially fell and got taken over by the GCPS. Always muck up that acronym.
So like technically an historical epic.
Well, maybe not an epic, just like a view of the period of time that, all these races that have effectively become part of Rebs, how all their home planets essentially fell because Superior no longer exists. That got destroyed and they made a new planet. I can't remember what was the planet's name at the top of my head. New Atlantia. New Atlantia is their capital planet now. Yeah. And so I find it interesting seeing what, you always hear about these ribs, hating the GCPS. I mean, but you also talk about, what you just said, it's so great being the GPS because you got all the huge products and all that, kind of diving into how horrible the GCPS have been historically to all these essentially taken over and conquered species that would make them want to rebel instead of all those years just kind of integrating with the society. So I think it would be quite interesting seeing that kind of a good kind of history lesson of all that, which could culminate in maybe the breaking up of some places from the GPS to become their own individual countries. I don't know. That's just my pitch anyway.
Mm-hmm.
I'm so glad that wasn't just a sentence.
Hey, I did the sentence and then I elaborated on the sentence. So I did answer the sentence aspect of it.
But well, 2 of us speak German, so we can have very long sentences.
Yeah. Exactly. You guys have you make up fancy names to describe things that we can't in English. So, I mean...
I think I would like more about planet licensing. No, just a joke. Of course not. But I think that's a bit the same that Dave said. I think the taking over is quite an interesting part. But personally, I'd love to see more about the gritty infighting. Maybe a spy story. Adrienne Nikolovsky, a Sphere 2. So she taking the rebellion. It's a bit like the Star Wars Saw Gerrera versus the other rebel cells. So the extremist who just wants to kill no matter what the GCPS and their whole system and bring it down versus others who want to make it a good system. I think that would be, as a story, my point. I'd love. But there's so many things, so it's really hard.
What about you, Chris? If you could pitch something to Mantic, which I'm assuming you have already, what's your ideal project? What's your dream project?
Yeah,
it's hard, eh? It's hard to come up with a sentence, isn't it?
I can't tell you. I can't tell you what I've already pitched to Mantic.
Yeah. Yes.
I think something that's not already been pitched yet. I think my dream would be Star Saga 2. I'd love to do Star Saga 2.
Yeah.
I'd love that to come back and write some more adventures, some more characters, more adventures. I love the storyline of Star Saga 2. Sorry. I'd love to do something like that again. That was a totally different experience. Going from writing, short stories and novels and short bits of fiction, and to then write a game and have to write scenarios that flow into each other and an overarching plot line as well. That was a totally different experience. So I'd love to do something like that again.
For me, it was one of the biggest strengths of Star Saga. As someone who loved the Dungeon Saga, the original one, I think the storyline, it wasn't just, it didn't feel like you have a dungeon crawler and you need the story to, have a bit of a progression there, but it really felt like there was an overarching story. And I'd really love to explore that a bit more. And also the characters, because a few of them are a bit known. There are a few story arcs who could be explored much more. Ogun Halker as an as a Crestor son, for example, or even Wrath as the lovely psychopath who killed a council member. So he can't be a normal mercenary in the GCPS because he's like the most wanted. Yeah. There's so many different takes, but also the background characters. I think Star Saga 2 would be perfect, or even a novelization of that. If we don't get
we were talking earlier on about you're talking earlier on about how many games there are in the Warpath universe that aren't war games. I'd love to do. It'd be fun to do a kind of a hybrid card miniature game that's to do with espionage. Something about corporations trying to wipe each other out. I'm sure something could be. You could spin something out there. Different corporate groups trying to destroy each other.
I like that. Yeah, it definitely has shown that there's so many different angles you can go on here. And I think that's what's rather exciting. I mean, we did get a Dungeon Saga, the Dwarf King's Quest novelization, so I can't see why they didn't. I think one of the tragedies that we have with Star Saga, and especially how I came to the party a bit late, is none of that source material is available online anymore. So you can't buy them directly off Mantic website. You can't buy the PDFs. I bought all the PDFs for Dreadball, and I love going through all the lore, finding about all these races, because I thought the races of Warpath were only consolidated to what you saw on their website as purchasable models. And then once you dive into the Dreadball, you see all like huge range. I mean, you get a centaur-like species there, and you get all these aquatic races that are in Dreadball, and there's so many different avenues. So I think that's where I'm kind of excited the most going forward, and hopefully we can start to see a lot of that come through. And I think we've got so much potential of throwing it out there. It's just a case of making sure people grab it and get it and speak up if they don't like something, or if they do like something. So it's all up to the listener here. Cool. All right. Well, we'll wrap things up there. So thanks everyone for listening today. And as a reminder, if you do want First Strike Alpha, it's Alpha Edition, right? Or Alpha? Yeah.
Alpha Strike Edition.
Alpha Strike Edition.
When I was writing it, I couldn't decide whether to call it First Strike or Alpha Strike. I went with First Strike. So I thought for this edition, it should be the Alpha Strike edition.
And it's good because there's a Halo book called First Strike, and that's one of the early books as well. And that always confused me when I heard that. Now you can either get that from Adepticon as a physical copy, and maybe buy two, and you send one down to New Zealand if you want. Please. You also can pre-order the Alpha Strike edition from the Winged Hussar publishing website, which we'll put in the
even digitally.
Yeah.
If I've seen it right?
I think actually, I'm not sure if it's both, but we'll put the links down below either one. And the more people that get it, the more of a signal you are sending to say, hey, we want more of this, and make sure you speak up. And
it's a really good book.
Yeah.
Like, it's not just it's nice to have lore here, but it's really a compelling story, different angles, it's turning points, twisting. It's really, 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 even without knowing anything about the Warpath universe, I think it's also a perfect stepping stone to get into it. If you're just playing and you don't want to go through the source book because it's not your thing, get it either way because it's just fun to read.
Yeah, 100%. And make sure you voice about it on social media, as Brandon Respond, who is the editor, the one in charge of Wing to Star, one of the ones in charge of Wing to Star. He mentioned that he was a little bit disappointed when he heard someone post on, I think, the Kings of War Fanatics, just mentioning, hey, I didn't realize Kings of War had any books. And the fact that they're on their 12th or 13th or 15th book at this point, and people are still only just discovering it. So Warpath has got even less than that. So make sure you put it out there, you buy a copy, talk about it, discuss with it, and just show your love for it. And I think, well, I definitely know Chris would appreciate it, but I think the whole community large will definitely appreciate it there. So I guess Chris, anywhere people can follow you? Do you have a Blue Sky account, anything like that?
No, I'm afraid I don't. I don't have any social media presence or anything like that at all, I'm afraid.
Can they find?
Oh, you're lucky one.
Yeah, just stay up there.
Understandable.
All right. Well, if anyone wants to reach out to you, is there any way they can do that, or you just don't want to talk to anybody?
Wing to Tsar would be the first point of contact, I think.
There you go. Cool. Awesome.
And if anybody has any questions that they want to send to you and you want to send to me, I'm happy to to answer any questions anybody has.
Yeah, I mean,
absolutely.
Yeah.
So post it down in the YouTube comments, on Spotify, in our Discord, maybe even in some Facebook Mantic groups. We will find it and we will deliver the question to Chris.
And if we get enough people interested, we could actually do a future review of this edition that's just coming out. And that would be good to dive into, especially how it's got a little bit of teaser, a bit of a Rebs mention there. And we do know Rebs hopefully will be coming up with something new on the Mantic range sometime soon. Fingers crossed. All right. Well, thanks everybody for listening. Thanks Claudio, thanks Matthias, and obviously thanks Chris the most. And we'll sign off there. And this episode was brought to you by the Drakenhof Corporation.
Fitting.